Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is former Congressman Brad Carson. He's the president of Americans for Responsible Innovation and the founder of Public First Action PAC. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
My honor to be with you today.
There is a big update in the battle between Anthropic and the Department of War, and I really want to get your take on it because the AI company and the Pentagon have been ensnared now in a weeks-long fight over how the military can use Anthropic's technology. And they couldn't reach an agreement, so the Department of War Secretary Pete Hegseth, he ultimately designated Anthropic a supply chain risk to national security, and President Trump banned federal agencies from using it. And Anthropic just now sued the Trump administration over all of that. So to start off the conversation, what do you make of the news?
It's no surprise. The company had said they were going to sue the Trump administration. I think most legal scholars believe that Anthropic has a very strong case here, that the supply chain risk designation is in fact a great overstep from the federal government. That SCR designation, to use the acronym for it, is usually reserved for companies like Kaspersky Labs, the Russian cybersecurity outfit, Huawei, the Chinese IT company. To designate an American really technological leader like Anthropic as an SCR is unprecedented and will almost certainly not hold up in court.
Talk about how we got here. I really think it would be in everyone's best interest to run through a timeline of the relationship between Anthropic and the Department of War. Because last year, the AI company secured a multi-million-dollar contract with the War Department, but they wanted to put in place some guardrails over how the military can use their technology, including ensuring it's not used to make autonomous weapons or it's not used to mass surveil Americans. And then the Pentagon wanted to be able to use Anthropic for, quote, all lawful purposes. Then, ultimately, there wasn't a deal. Anthropic had those guardrails in place. The Pentagon didn't agree to them. The Trump administration wasn't happy with those stipulations, and President Trump posted this: "The United States of America will never allow a radical left woke company to dictate how our great military fights and wins wars." And he directed every federal agency to stop using Anthropic immediately, and he gave the Department of War a 6-month phase-out period. Then War Secretary Hegseth, he designated Anthropic a supply chain risk. Anthropic then argued that the federal government waged an unlawful campaign of retaliation against the company. You said this was a strong argument. Talk to us about why.
Well, I think a couple of things. Every company should have the right to do business with the government or not, right? You have the choice not to participate at all. And so to be designated a supply chain risk, they basically try to murder the company, to use a phrase a lot of people in this space are talking about. So it really makes no sense. Supply chain risk has a designated legal application, and it is the foreign companies that do actually present national security risks. I don't think anyone argues that Anthropic has a national security risk to us. And so I do think in a lot of ways it's retaliation against the company for a lot of actions that the Trump administration hasn't liked, from arguing for AI guardrails as an example, to perhaps hiring people from the Biden administration, to now wanting these two very commonsensical guardrails that the Department of War has decided they don't want to abide by.
Shortly after everything went down with Anthropic and the Department of War, and that deal disintegrated, and Hegseth designated them a supply chain risk, OpenAI, which is a competitor to Anthropic, they swooped in and they struck a deal of their own with the Pentagon. They said it had more guardrails than the Anthropic deal, and they said it had red lines, and those red lines included that the Department of War was not allowed to use OpenAI for mass domestic surveillance, to power autonomous weapons, or for high-stakes automatic decisions like a social credit system. What do you make of that?
I think even Sam Altman has said it was precipitous to do the deal on Friday. They spent most of the weekend trying to walk it back after a lot of people who were experts in national security law criticized it. On Monday, they came forward with a purported new deal, but it too has come under rather withering criticism because the guardrails that they claim to have, which are really identical to what Anthropic was asking for, are in fact no guardrails at all. They kind of blind you with science a bit. They use terms of art, legal terms of art, like surveillance. You and I might think we know what surveillance means. Well, the national security establishment defines words like surveillance in very narrow ways, like the interception, the intentional interception of a communication between you and me. But if they incidentally collect information, if they find data that's publicly available, these are all things that they think they can do. And I think what Anthropic's concern was, that's worth talking about, is For the last 7 or 8 years, the Department of War has been aggregating these mass consumer databases and bringing them into their scrutiny. And they've claimed they need no warrant to do that, that it's perfectly legal. And you know, for a long time, that was concerning to many civil libertarians, but sheer friction made that not an incredible danger. Because if they wanted to research Brad Carson, as an example, they'd have to query my name. You know, they could do it one person at a time. The databases may not be making inferences with each other. A lot of the data they're collecting, and we should know what people should know what the government has. They have all of my geolocation data. My phone is pinging off of cell towers. They know all the places I've been. They know every URL I visited in my web searching. They know every app I visited, right? They can overlay that with private government information, like I'm a veteran, so my veterans records. I was a government employee, so my government personnel records. I applied for a top secret clearance and received it. But on there, you have to talk about your medical history, your behavioral health history. They have access to all of that. So if they wanted to create a dossier about me, they could easily do that. But it used to be it was hard to do. The databases wouldn't speak to each other. The geolocation data may not be actually identified that easily with me in my phone. Now LLMs can make all those connections and more. And so you can simply enter a query, not about Brad Carson, but about someone who lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I do, who maybe be interested in AI policy, who may be skeptical of a deal like this, and my name will come up. That's a frightening thing. So what is happening is like the possibilities of mass surveillance, the LLMs empower, is really remarkable. Anthropic recognized that. The Department of Defense, though, they don't even define that as surveillance at all. So what the red lines that OpenAI agreed to, I think everyone who understands the law recognizes that they're not any red lines at all. They're just kind of like papering over and trying to do like a public relations kind of gesture.
That's really scary when you lay it out like that because of AI, it could find out everything about you down to every URL, every web search you've made. I mean, do you think that the government would do this for every person? Because I can imagine with AI and how it's rapidly developing, it would just take a few seconds, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, just imagine what happened in the past when I mentioned the friction. So some human being could query my name and pull up every URL I visited. But you really have to figure out like what that really meant. Like, you know, hundreds, thousands of URLs overlaid with geolocation data. To actually make all those connections for a human being, extremely difficult. The LLM, however, can do it in seconds and say, you know, Brad has been researching X or Y. He visited A and B, and put this all together into a narrative that heretofore was not really possible. And so will they do it on a particular person? I certainly hope not. But what is important for your listeners to understand is like that is perfectly legal for the Department of War to do that today, for the intelligence community to do that, because they don't define that kind of creation of personal dossiers as surveillance at all. And so when they say they're not going to do surveillance, again, it's important to remember the kind of the scariest things they define as not being surveillance at all. Anthropic recognized that. They wanted to put new guardrails around it. But that's why the Department of War says, well, I want to be able to lawfully use it for things. But again, the lawful use of it in the age of AI is what's particularly worrisome.
I want to read you something that OpenAI said and get your perspective on it, especially as a former general counsel for the Army. They said the department also affirmed that our services will not be used by Department of War intelligence agencies like the NSA. I mean, what do you make of that? How much weight does that have?
It really makes no sense to me because first I would say, what does it mean to affirm? Are you saying it's a contract provision? If so, we'd all like to see what the contract says about that. You know, merely having them say it or give a head nod in that direction means nothing if it's not actually the contract. I think the second point is it makes no sense to me why the Department of War would agree to that. So for example, I want the NSA to use Anthropic against the Iranians, against the Chinese, against terrorist groups. So there is a proper use of Anthropic or ChatGPT in the intelligence community. Are they saying they're not going to use it for that? That's what that language seemed to imply. I just don't want that used on American citizens. I don't want it to be used for domestic surveillance. The surveillance of our enemies is actually a great use case for AI. And so it makes no sense to me. And that's, you know, I said this on X. I've reluctantly come to the conclusion, like, I don't think that's in there. I don't think it's in the contract. because there's no Secretary of War who would agree to that. And they shouldn't agree to that because, again, it stops us from doing the needed foreign surveillance. The guardrail we need is about American citizens and preventing surveillance of citizens.
Sam Altman, like you said, faced a lot of criticism over his decision to really swoop in here, get that deal with the Pentagon done right after their deal with Anthropic really fell apart. And he reportedly met with staff, and he said that their company, OpenAI, doesn't, quote, get to make operational decisions on how the government uses their technology. What do you make of that? I mean, I think that begs the question, maybe perhaps the larger question of what power do you have as an AI company when you hand over your technology for the military to use? I mean, how far does that go?
It is a great question. And in some ways, the companies are faced with either doing business with the government or not. But I think what's frustrating to me is how what Sam said in that statement you just quoted is at odds with what they put out in their press releases. I think it's a completely coherent position for any company to say the government can use my product for lawful purposes, and Congress, the executive branch, get to define what lawful purpose means. What you can't say is like, oh, we actually have all these restrictions. We're going to have forward deployed engineers. We're going to have all these guardrails around it. So they're actually not going to use it for all the things they want to do. So the truth is the government's going to use it for whatever they want to do. There are no guardrails in place in the OpenAI contract. Pete Hegseth can do what he thinks is lawful. He'll have lawyers advising him about that. There's a sharp debate about whether it should be lawful or not. That's really the question. And Anthropic tried to say well, we're really worried about this new use, how AI can empower domestic surveillance. And we think that probably should be unlawful, but Congress hasn't caught up to it yet. The American people aren't informed about it. And so they try to restrict it. So I think what Sam Altman's saying is you can't have it both ways. OpenAI is going to be used by the government. Again, that's a coherent view. It's not one that Anthropic thought was the right one. And so he's trying to give a public relations spin that we have some kind of guardrails. There are no guardrails.
I'm curious how AI exactly is used in warfare. And a lot of people are curious about that too, because the day before the U.S. and Israel launched joint attacks on Iran, President Trump banned Anthropic from federal agencies. He let the War Department have a 6-month phase-out period. He said the selfishness of left-wing nutjobs running Anthropic, those were his words, is putting American lives at risk, our troops in danger, and our national security in jeopardy. However, reporting did come out that Anthropic's technology was used in the war against Iran. So in general, how is AI used in warfare?
So the best use of AI in warfare is fusing intelligence. And by that, I mean, imagine you're running the war. You have intelligence coming in from intercepted electronic communications. You have photographic imagery. You have human sources who are filing reports that agents are catching down. And all these kind of things are very hard to put into a common operating picture, to link them all together. Well, AI can do that really well. And so it can look at this huge, huge database of material that would defy any human being or even team of human beings to look at and make all the connections you need to identify, hey, this person could be a terrorist, or this is someone worth looking after, or there's suspicious activity here. And it can look at financial records, again, imagery, intercepted communications, human intelligence reports, all that. That's a great use of it, and that's how they're using it. I think Claude is helping identify targets by looking at all these intelligence sources and saying hey, this is a target, this is where the IRGC or the Iranian government might be. That's a great use of it, and that's a common use of it, and probably the best use of it. And that's why when they say they're not going to be used in the intelligence community, that makes no sense, because if we want to be fighting these wars well, we should be using AI to identify targets in Iran. Not by not having a human in the loop, which was another controversy in the OpenAI matter. It's yeah, you should have a human in the loop to verify the AI output, but having the AI give you some initial kind of efforts at that is a very smart thing, and that is how it's being used.
And then I know that people are concerned AI is going to be taking people's jobs at a rapid rate. Do you think it will take the jobs of military, of boots on the ground, where we would see less boots on the ground and then AI would be used? I know Anthropic didn't want their AI to be used for autonomous weapons, but do you think we would see something like that where there's less military, more AI?
I think you already are seeing that. There have been reports in the Wall Street Journal, for example, that what took 200 people 5 years ago now takes 20 people in terms of like bringing all these intelligence sources together and helping like getting a common operating picture in theater. So I think you're already seeing AI replace a lot of people. And again, that's a good thing. We want fewer boots on the ground where possible. But I think you're already seeing a lot of that in this war as AI is having a big impact already.
And then what are you looking out for next in this battle when it comes to Anthropic, the Department of War, the Trump administration, and now OpenAI?
I think there has to be a larger public debate, and Congress, because of this controversy, is now seized of this matter too, about what is the lawful use of AI. That's really what this controversy is about, is what is lawful use in the Department of War's idea in their mind is probably pretty objectionable to many Americans. As I mentioned, creating dossiers on American citizens. They consider that perfectly permissible. Is it? Should it be? Again, if that's what the law allows today, there's going to be a question of like, should the law continue to permit it now that AI has supercharged the ability to make connections across databases? So I think that's what we're going to see next, is over the next 8 or 9 months, even on the campaign trail, you're going to see people talking about like mass surveillance. Are we okay with this or not? What is lawful use? And I think in my own mind, Congress needs to tighten up those definitions quite a bit, and you're going to see some movement toward that.
And to that point, and I know we touched on this 2 weeks ago in a conversation that was similar, whose responsibility is it to put those guardrails on? Is it a company like Anthropic? Is it the administration? Is it Congress and other lawmakers? What does that look like to you?
I think Congress has the primary responsibility to put the guardrails in place. But the company should have the right to not deal with the government if they choose not to accept those guardrails. So I don't think you can force Anthropic or OpenAI to work for the government. I think companies should. That's a great patriotic thing to do. But if for some reason you say, like, I don't want to do that, we should allow that. You shouldn't force them into it. You shouldn't try to kill the company if they choose not to do business with the government. But fundamentally, Congress has to set the right guardrails in place. It's very complicated, though, these legal questions. A lot of the work happens in a classified space, so it's hard to really know how the intelligence services are actually using it. So it's a hard thing for politicians to get a handle on, but it is a very important one.
Congressman, I appreciate the conversations as always. And I mean, AI is such a rapidly developing conversation. This is different than the conversation we had a week and a half ago. And I think we'll have plenty of more to come. So I hope you can join me again. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me on.